If you've ever driven across Texas, and if you have, you know that takes commitment, a full tank of gas, and a serious conversation with yourself about life choices. You've passed through country that used to be something. Towns that had names, had schools, had Saturday nights worth remembering. And now, there's nothing there but wind and a historical marker that nobody stops to read. Texas is the second largest state in the country, and it has been swallowing its own history for 200 years. Most people never notice. Most people were never supposed to. Hi, my name is Thomas, and this is Lost U.S. Towns. Number 13, Indianola, Calhoun County. We start at number 13 with a town that was, by every reasonable measure, one of the most important ports in the entire state of Texas. Not a small trading post, not a frontier outpost. A genuine, functioning, thriving port city that competed directly with Galveston for dominance over Gulf Coast commerce. Indianola sat on Matagorda Bay in Calhoun County along the central Texas coast. In the 1850s and 1860s, it was the primary entry point for immigrants pouring into Texas from Germany, Austria, and Central Europe. Tens of thousands of people stepped off ships onto Indianola's docks and walked straight into the Texas interior to build the hill country communities that still exist today. The town had hotels, warehouses, a custom house, telegraph lines, ice houses, and a population pushing 6,000 at its peak. Then 1875 arrived. A hurricane came off the Gulf with almost no warning. The storm surge flooded the entire lower town. Buildings were leveled. Dozens of people drowned. The damage was catastrophic, but not fatal. Indianola rebuilt. Residents came back. The port reopened. People looked at what the storm had done and decided to stay anyway, because that is exactly the kind of thing Texans do. 11 years later, in 1886, another hurricane hit. This one was worse. The storm surge was higher. The wind was stronger. The fires that broke out in the aftermath burned what the water did not take. When it was over, Indianola was not damaged. It was gone. This time, residents did not come back. The few who tried were bought out by insurance companies who had learned their lesson. The port infrastructure was never rebuilt. Galveston absorbed the commerce, and Indianola simply ceased to exist. Today, the site is largely underwater at high tide. A historical marker stands near the shore. A partially submerged cemetery holds the graves of residents who never imagined their town would one day be a footnote. The Gulf of Mexico is still out there, patient as ever, and completely unbothered. Number 12, Lobo, Culberson County. Number 12 sits so far out in West Texas that just getting there feels like a decision you have to explain to someone. Lobo is in Culberson County, out past Van Horn on the way to nowhere in particular, in the kind of flat, sun-hammered landscape where the horizon goes on forever and the silence has actual weight. The town grew up in the early 1900s as a railroad stop on the Southern Pacific Line. Water, a depot, a few families, the usual story. At its modest peak, Lobo had a post office, a school, a handful of ranching families, and exactly the kind of stubborn small-town pride that West Texas specializes in producing. Then the Southern Pacific stopped needing the stop. The post office closed in 1945. The families scattered. The buildings gave themselves back to the desert. Here is where Lobo gets interesting. In the 1990s, an artist couple named Sherry Hausler and Brad Dossie bought the old Lobo school building and tried to turn the entire ghost town into an art destination. They ran it as a gallery and event space. They threw parties out there in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert. For a moment, it seemed like one of those wonderful, impractical ideas that actually works. It did not. The isolation that made Lobo romantic also made it genuinely impossible to sustain. The project faded. The building sat. The desert went back to doing what deserts do, which is wait. Today, the old school building still stands, faded and quiet. If you drive out there on a clear night, The stars over Lobo are extraordinary. That much, at least, the desert kept. Number 11. Thurber, Erath County. Number 11 is one of the most remarkable company town stories in American history, and it sits right in the middle of Texas where almost nobody expects to find it. Thurber is in Erath County, just off Interstate 20 between Fort Worth and Abilene. You have almost certainly driven past the exit. You probably did not stop. That is a mistake worth correcting. In its prime, Thurber had 10,000 residents. 10,000. In Erath County, Texas. It was entirely built, owned, and operated by the Texas and Pacific Coal Company, which later became the Texas Pacific Coal and Oil Company. The company built the houses. The company built the churches. The company built the schools, the hospital, the opera house, the hotel, and every single business that operated inside the town limits. Workers were paid in company script. Sound familiar? The whole system was engineered so that money went in one direction only, and that direction was not toward the miners. What made Thurber unusual was that it was one of the only fully unionized towns in all of Texas. The United Mine Workers organized Thurber in 1893 and held it for decades. That detail is not small. In Texas, at the turn of the 20th century, a unionized company town of 10,000 people was genuinely extraordinary. Then, the Texas oil boom happened. Cheaper, more efficient fuel was coming out of the ground everywhere, and coal simply could not compete. The company shifted its operations to oil. The mines closed. And then, the company did something almost no one does. They picked up the entire town and took it with them, brick by brick, building by building. The company dismantled Thurber and moved the materials elsewhere because they owned all of it and had no reason to leave anything behind. By the early 1930s, 10,000 people had become almost zero. What remains today is a smokestack. One single brick smokestack standing in an open field off the interstate, visible from the highway, pointing straight up at the Texas sky like it is still waiting for someone to come back and explain what happened. There is a small museum and a restaurant called the Smokestack that does a reasonable chicken fried steak. I mention that not because it is historically significant, but because you are going to be hungry after the drive and you deserve to know. Number 10. Cheapside, Gonzales County. Number 10 has one of the best town names on this entire list, and one of the most devastating single-event collapses of any community in Texas history. Cheapside is in Gonzales County in south-central Texas, farm country, the kind of place where families had worked the same land for 3 and 4 generations. At its modest peak, Cheapside had a few hundred residents, a school, a cotton gin, some small businesses, and the social heartbeat of most rural Texas communities in the 1920s, the Saturday night dance. On April 9, 1927, a natural gas explosion destroyed the Cheapside dance hall while it was full of people. More than 50 people were killed. In a community of a few hundred, that number does not just represent a tragedy, it represents the near total elimination of a generation. Almost every family in Cheapside lost someone that night. Some lost everyone. The community never recovered. How could it? The social fabric of a small rural town is built on shared history, on neighbors who have known each other their whole lives. When you lose that many people at once, what remains is grief and empty chairs, and a silence at the table that does not go away. Today, Cheapside is barely a crossroads. A few structures remain. A cemetery holds the victims of that April night. Most people driving through Gonzales County have never heard the name. The ones who have tend to get quiet when it comes up. Number 9. Terlingua, Brewster County. Number 9 is the one ghost town on this list that technically refuses to be fully dead, and honestly, good for it. Terlingua sits in Brewster County in far west Texas, Big Bend country, closer to Mexico than to any major Texas city. The Chisos Mountains lie to the south, the Rio Grande lies to the southwest, and in between, Terlingua is doing exactly what it wants. The town grew up in the 1890s around mercury mining. The Chisos Mining Company built everything: the town, the store, the adobe housing, and employed hundreds of miners pulling toxic ore from the earth for wages that reflected precisely how replaceable the company considered them. At its peak, over 2,000 residents lived there. By 1946, the ore was gone, and so was everyone else. Then, in the 1960s, writers, artists, and people with strong opinions about solitude started buying up the ruins. The ghost town became a community again. Stubborn, unconventional, completely itself. In 1967, the first World Championship Chili Cook-Off was held right here in the ruins. It now draws thousands every November. A mercury mining ghost town hosting one of the most famous food events in America. That sentence should not work. It absolutely does. The cemetery at sunset is one of the most beautiful places in Texas. Go see it. Number 8. Desdona, Eastland County. Number 8 is proof that the fastest way to build a Texas town and the fastest way to destroy one are sometimes the exact same thing. Before 1918, Desdona was a quiet farming community called Hogtown. I want you to sit with that for a second. Hogtown, Texas. The residents pushed to change it, which is understandable. Whether Desdemona is an improvement depends entirely on your feelings about Shakespeare. Then oil came in. Within months, a few hundred farming families became 15,000 people. Tent cities, saloons, gambling halls, and 3 men rotating shifts on a single cot. Oil money does not wait for infrastructure. By 1921, the wells played out. The 15,000 left almost as fast as they arrived. Today, Desdemona has around 400 residents. Some still find old bottles in the fields from the boom years. The ground remembers even when everything else has moved on. Number 7. Saluria, Calhoun County. Number 7 is the forgotten story behind number 13, and most Texans have never heard it, even though it deserves its own chapter in the history books. If Indianola was the great Gulf Coast port that the hurricanes took, Saluria was its predecessor, a port community on Matagorda Island that was established in the 1840s as the initial landing point for ships entering Matagorda Bay. Before Indianola dominated the coast, Saluria was processing the commerce. Confederate forces held it during the Civil War. Union forces took it back. By the time the second Indianola hurricane hit in 1886, Saluria had already been battered into irrelevance. The storms that damaged Indianola damaged Saluria first and worse. The land it stood on is largely submerged today, not occasionally flooded, gone, underwater. The Gulf of Mexico reclaimed it so completely that there is almost no physical trace remaining of a town that once mattered enormously to the movement of people and goods into the interior of Texas. 2 towns, same bay, same storms, same ending. Indianola at least gets the historical marker. Saluria gets the water. Number 6. Justiceburg, Garza County. Number 6 sits out on the Caprock Escarpment in the rolling, broken country of West Texas, where the land drops off the high plains and the wind never stops. Justiceburg had a post office, a school, a few businesses, and the loyalty of the ranching families who had built their lives along the Double Mountain Fork of the Brazos River. The town existed as a supply center for the surrounding ranches, which in that part of Texas meant it was doing genuinely necessary work. People drove a long way to get there because there was nowhere else to go. Then, the railroad came through and made a route decision that bypassed Justiceburg entirely. The highway followed the railroad, as highways tend to do. Commerce moved to Post, the county seat that had better connections. Without freight access and without the highway, Justiceburg had no way to keep its businesses alive. The school closed. Families moved closer to where the road went. Today, Justiceburg is technically still on the map. A few families remain in the area, The land is still ranched. But the town itself, the functioning community with its school and its post office and its shared sense of identity, is gone. The Caprock country out there is extraordinarily beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. Drive out on a clear day and you will understand immediately why people settled there and why staying became impossible. Number 5. Corral City, Denton County. Number 5 is the most quietly absurd entry on this list because Corral City technically still exists. It is an incorporated municipality in Denton County, sitting in the middle of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, one of the fastest-growing urban areas in the entire country. Its population is somewhere between 12 and 20 people, depending on who is counting and whether the person doing the counting is being generous. Corral City was incorporated in 1951 as a small rural community in northern Denton County. When the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex began its sprawl northward, the towns around Corral City grew. Corral City did not. The reasons are various and somewhat technical, involving road access, land use, and the specific geography of development pressure in that part of the county. The short version is that the growth went around it. Today, Corral City is surrounded by subdivisions, highway infrastructure, and the full apparatus of modern suburban Texas. Sitting in the middle of all of it, like a period at the end of a very long sentence, is a community that never became anything, has no plans to become anything, and is somehow still officially a city. It holds municipal elections, it has a mayor, it files the necessary paperwork with the state of Texas every year. 12 to 20 people in Denton County in 2024. The definition of a ghost town, wearing a city's legal clothing and daring someone to say something about it. Number 4. Belcherville, Montague County. Number 4 lost everything that mattered in under a decade, and it lost each thing separately, which somehow makes it worse. Belcherville is in Montague County in North Texas, near the Oklahoma border. In the 1880s, it was doing well enough to be the county seat. That is not nothing. County seats have courthouses. Courthouses bring lawyers. Lawyers bring business. Business brings people. Belcherville had the full chain. Then, in 1887, the county seat was moved to Montague. The courthouse left. The lawyers followed the courthouse. The businesses that depended on courthouse traffic closed. The post office held on for a while. The railroad spur that had connected Belcherville to the outside world was abandoned. The post office closed in the early 1900s. What is left today is a small community, a few houses, a church, a cemetery, and the feeling that you are standing somewhere that used to be significantly more than what it is. The sequence of losses: courthouse, then lawyers, then businesses, then railroad, then post office, reads like a slow, quiet unraveling. Not a disaster, not a single bad day, just a town losing one reason at a time to keep existing until there were no reasons left. Number 3. The settlements of Goliad, Goliad County. Number 3 is not a single town. It is a cluster of them, and their story runs deeper into Texas history than almost anything else on this list. Around the Mission and Presidio complex at Goliad in Goliad County, civilian settlements grew up during the Spanish colonial period and into the early Mexican period of Texas history. Small communities of farmers, traders, and mission workers built their lives around the protection and commerce generated by the military and religious installations nearby. When Texas independence came, the war did not spare them. The Goliad Massacre of 1836, in which nearly 350 Texian prisoners were executed on the orders of General Santa Anna, is one of the most documented atrocities of the Texas Revolution. What is less documented is what happened to the civilian settlements in the surrounding area. Communities that had existed for generations, built by people who had been in that river valley since before the United States existed as a country, were depopulated by the violence, the displacement, and the chaos that followed the revolution. Some were absorbed into the town of Goliad as it reorganized under the Republic of Texas. Others simply ceased. The families scattered. The buildings came down or fell down. The land was reclaimed by other purposes. These settlements do not have dramatic individual names that appear on tourist maps. They are the negative space in the Goliad story, the communities that existed before the battle and were not there afterward. The mission and the Presidio got the historic preservation. The people who lived in their shadow got forgotten. That distinction is worth sitting with. Number 2, Jot Em Down, Delta County. Number 2 has the greatest name of any town in Texas history, and I will not be taking questions on that. Jot Em Down is in Delta County in northeast Texas. It was named after the fictional general store from the Lum and Abner radio show, a wildly popular program in the 1930s that depicted life in a small Arkansas town and was heard on radios across rural America every single week. When the community needed a name for their post office, they chose the name of the store from their favorite radio program. That is the most 1930s rural Texas thing that has ever happened, and I love it completely. At its modest peak, Jot Em Down had a post office, a school, a community church, and a general store that presumably appreciated the irony of actually being the thing it was named after. It served the farming families of that corner of Delta County through the Depression years and into the post-war period. The post office closed in 1955. The school consolidated with a larger district. The general store did what general stores do when the road improves, and the nearest town with a proper grocery gets 20 minutes closer. It closed. What remains today is the name, which appears on old county maps and in the memories of families from that part of northeast Texas, and a cemetery where people who were born, lived, and died in Jot Em Down are buried under the East Texas sky. The Lum and Abner radio show has been off the air since 1954. The town it inspired has been gone about as long. Both of them deserve to be remembered more than they are. Number 1, Shanghai, Falls County. Number 1 is the most deliberately buried story on this entire list. Shanghai was a Reconstruction-era community in Falls County, built by freed black Texans after 1865. They built a church, a school, a life on their own terms for the very first time. It did not last. As Reconstruction collapsed, economic pressure, land title manipulation, and direct violence dismantled communities like Shanghai across Texas. The families were displaced. The land changed hands. No marker was left behind. No memorial. Just silence of where a neighborhood used to be. This is not an unusual story. Dozens of communities built by freed people after the Civil War were deliberately destroyed by people who did not want them to exist. Most Texans have never heard of Shanghai. That is not an accident. That is the point. It was real. The people were real. And that is exactly why it is number 1. 13 towns, 13 different ways. Texas erased pieces of itself. Hurricanes and oil booms, and railroad maps, and company decisions, and deliberate, organized destruction. The reasons are different. The silence at the end is the same. If you know a Texas ghost town that deserves its own video, drop the name in the comments. I read every single one. If enough people ask for the same place, that is what we cover next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. My name is Thomas. This is Lost U.S. Towns, and there are a lot more of these stories where that came from.